Check me out.
Yeah. Hey, podcast listening people. What are you up to today, huh?
Yeah.
Hope you're having a fantastic day. Really appreciate you tuning in as always. My name's Connor Doobie and I'm your host each and every single episode. Don't forget to do us this small favor. Tiny favor. Please, wherever you're listening, give us a review and subscribe. And also, whenever you see us on social media, give us a shout too. We love to hear from you guys. We love your feedback, and we're here to make this a great platform for you, a powerful platform, bringing in experts and influencers, entrepreneurs, and leaders from Colorado straight to your ear holes every single week. This is Mile High Mentors, and I appreciate it. We have a really good show for you guys today. I'm super excited. Venture capital is so hot right now, right? We brought in Michael Klein for this episode today, who is the co-founder and managing director at Zero G Capital, which is an early stage funding. They provide early stage funding for founders that hustle. That's on their website. And Michael's a really cool guy. He's gotten his degree completed his degree in biochemistry and was going to go into med school to become a doctor, made a career shift, started having a lot of success in the venture capital space, and now, and you can hear in the podcast, is super passionate about it. And I'm super interested in this too. Again, it's such a hot, interesting space now. People are fascinated by getting funding for their startup and their startup ideas. I think a lot more people are diving into entrepreneurship, diving into startup community now because of technology. Barrier to resources are less. And this was also really cool in comparison. If you remember, we had Peter Adams on the podcast, and Peter Adams is on the angel investing side. So now we're going to give you a little peek into the VC side of things. Before we dive in real quick, don't forget, if you're interested in partnering up with us in any way, sponsoring the show, getting your product service information in front of our incredible Colorado audience, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, send us an email, milehighmentors@gmail.com. I know we're getting this website finalized here. Websites are notorious for never ever being launched on time. We're finally going to get this thing done here soon. So keep an eye out. We'll make the announcement. But for now, send us a message on social media, or you can just email us, milehighmentors@gmail.com. Love to hear from you guys. Love to partner up any way that we can do that. All right, guys, without further ado, please give it up and welcome Michael Klein to the Mile High Mentors podcast. Live. Appreciate you joining me, man. It's great to connect up. And as a starting place, what's your favorite part about Colorado, Mr. Michael Klein?
Well, Connor, that's a good question. I just have to say the people, just super friendly people, always willing to help out. And then the mountains aren't too bad either.
So the people and mountains and where are you from originally, Michael?
Originally Ohio. So actually, let me throw in the sunshine also.
Okay. And the sunshine, of course. Today was gorgeous. Like, it was actually like kind of a little hint of warm today, which was pretty nice.
Yeah, I rode a scooter to a meeting, first time on a scooter. And I figured this was the day to do it if you're going to ride a scooter in the winter. Okay,
so what's your perspective on the scooters? Being in the startup, the tech and investment space?
Yeah, super disruptive, I'm interested to see how it affects Uber and Lyft rides, especially in the spring and summer, but you can almost get places downtown faster via scooter than in a car. And of course, you don't have to worry about parking.
Yeah, you just drop that thing off anywhere, which is also good and bad.
Right.
Yeah. No, I found myself using that almost as a lift. Like the other day, even though it was freezing outside, and I decided to take a scooter instead of a lift just because I didn't want to wait around, and it was like just up the street.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, it's quick for those little trips.
But they're fun. It's like, you never see somebody riding by on a scooter with a frown on their face.
It's true. I do hear there's a lot of, broken arms and things like that coming out from the scooters.
I'm sure. But I think most of the population of Denver are 90s babies. So we're kind of just intuitively natural at riding scooters. You know, we had the Razor scooters growing up, or, you know, 80s, 90s babies. We had the Razor scooters and everything like that. So I think considering how many are out there, we're probably doing a pretty good job in terms of people breaking themselves for the most part, from what I've heard at least. But they're so fun. Like, they're almost too fun to be like scooting around downtown. So, bro, what brought you to Colorado in the first place? What brought you to Mile High City?
So my sister lives here, and I'd visited a few times, and I decided I wanted to be out here. And I am good friends with a few people in the venture community, Seth Levine being one of them. And he talked me into coming out, said, hey, like, you got to come check out Colorado. And it had already been on my radar as a place I wanted to be next. So I just pulled the trigger and came out.
Mm-hmm. And you came out wanting to be in the venture capital space. That was your intent when you came out here?
Yeah, you know, I was doing more M&A type work, though, with a late stage venture fund. And I was spending a fair amount of time in New York before this. So it was okay doing something more in the corp dev M&A side. But venture's sort of always been my passion. It's really like my career's been almost all venture. And I'm passionate about entrepreneurialism and technology. So that was the preference. But I came here with an open mind.
And for those who don't, what's M&A for those who don't know?
Mergers and acquisitions. So when you want to acquire a company or be acquired yourself, there's work that goes along with that.
And so in your space, what's the difference between M&A and like venture capital?
So venture capital is the funding of a company. It can be at different stages. It can be anywhere from we have an idea, back us to make this idea a reality, to we have the initial formation of a business. We're just starting to sell a product. Give us some capital to essentially grow sales. Or it can be, hey, we've got a $30 or $50 million business and we want to take that now to $150, $200 million business. Give us some capital to grow. So venture capital is the infusion of capital, so money, into a company to get it further along, usually at a fast pace, much faster than if you were to grow organically. Exiting is essentially a merger and acquisition activity. And that's how venture capitalists and the people that invest, called LPs, in venture capital, that's how they get paid. So at the end of the day, most likely in today's climate, your company is going to be acquired by a bigger company. And that can be a combination of stock and cash or just stock. But that's called an exit. And that cash is then distributed to investors. And venture capital funds would be one of those investors. And then venture capital fund will distribute it to its investors.
So most investors, their intent is to go in to get that business acquired. But don't a lot of investors structure in a way that they're making sales revenues as well? Like they're making a percentage of the business. Like say the business never sells, venture capital people would never make their money if they just set it up that way, right?
So traditionally in venture capital, there's not sales participation. Generally a business that is operating from that perspective, they issue dividends, and that's how they pay back investors versus just the accumulation or the increase of stock price, essentially. But venture capital investments, that's pretty rare.
Was there someone early in your life that got you into what came first? Was it the interest and passion in finance, or was it more in startups, entrepreneurship, and business ideas?
Yeah, so I had been entrepreneurial from an early age, I would say late high school, early college, but I didn't really know what to do with it, I suppose. And
Entrepreneurial in what way?
I started a energy bar business. I had little businesses that I had spun up of things that I was interested in. It was sort of, this doesn't exist. Why doesn't this exist? And I had friends in college that were trying to build their own companies. And I just found it was like really fun to go over and hang out on the couch and brainstorm ideas. And I didn't major in business in college. I did a master's later, an MBA. But I just enjoyed the problem solving aspect of it. So, and I always enjoyed technology. I have a brother that's super enthusiastic about every new product that comes out. And it was one of the ways we could bond. Like building our own computers from scratch, things like that. So we were kind of tinkering around, and I enjoyed all those things. And, eventually, after I landed sort of my first job out of college, I was exposed to all the different business units. I realized I really loved finance, and I thought, well, it would be really cool if I could combine finance with entrepreneurialism. And lo and behold, that's called venture capital, right? So I sort of...
Wow, there's a thing for that.
Right. I wish this thing existed. Oh, it does. It does exist.
There's an app for it, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of the story. So I would say I was just more passionate about problem solving, and it'd be cool if this existed, or it'd be cool if that existed, or what's the world going to look like in 10 years, right?
You were how old when you started like teasing out this passion?
That's a good question. I would say probably 18. But the technology side, it was, as early as I can remember, like we had back in the day, we had like those early versions of PCs, and me and my brother would have to figure out. It was like when everything was really clunky, right? It was like really hard to get a LAN game going, or it was really hard to keep a constant connection to the internet, things like that. And we would figure those things out, and we'd always be looking at the new, oh my gosh, this is a 100 megabyte hard drive, right? Like it's huge. Like how do they do this, right? So we were always interested in the technology aspect.
Yeah. Does your brother work with you now?
No, he doesn't.
Oh, okay. Is he in Colorado, or he's back home still?
Yeah, he's in Ohio, and he's still tinkering.
Still tinkering, huh? Yeah. Okay. Well, so what about your parents? Were both either your parents entrepreneurs, or was there somebody else? Well, yeah, first off, were your parents entrepreneurs at all?
So my dad is a physician, but he's an entrepreneurial physician, which is more and more rare these days. So started his own practice, built it up, multi-practice. Is
it more rare these days that entrepreneurial physicians would be starting up now?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I think there's a few shifts. Like the physicians of today, I don't think want to work as long hours, and they're willing to trade. They're willing to trade some upside for that. And then hospitals are increasingly acquiring practices and making them part of their hospital network. And then they hire the physicians as employees. So there's those two things. But back in the day, that was sort of like, I think it was much more common for physicians to be entrepreneurial. You'd own your own practice. And my mom managed physician offices. So she managed my dad's office. So, it was work talk every evening at the dinner table, right? Like, they work together, they're managing the office. Like, the physicians, like, I want to take vacation. Office managers, like, you can't take vacation. And those two people happen to be my mom and dad, right? So yeah, very, very entrepreneurial, not in the tech sense, in the medical sense, but certainly like experienced, secondhand the roller coaster of entrepreneurialism, which is sort of a hallmark of it, right? Like there would be good years, bad years, things would happen. And why I wasn't exposed to all of it directly. I was exposed to the, emotional swings and things that come along with that.
Yeah. Well, what do you mean by that? Go a little deeper on that.
Well, just you can tell, right? Even as a young child, you can tell when there's stresses at work, and certain years or certain months or certain quarters are more stressful than others, right?
Welcome to entrepreneurial land, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So given your younger years, did you went to school, right? Where'd you go to college?
So I went to a small school on the West Coast called La Sierra. It's really a feeder school for medical school, which was originally what I was going to do. I started
So you were going to go into medical then?
Yeah, that was the original plan. Sort of decided last minute not to, probably partly because of my my increasing interest in startups and in business, but simultaneously my functional ADD that probably isn't as functional when you're a physician and you're increasingly having a narrow focus, right?
So you'd rather have much broader focus.
Right, and venture's perfect for that because in a day I can see 4 different pitches, completely different verticals with completely different business models, and it just excites me and fascinates me. So it's just constant changing gears. And I think a lot of guys that are really successful in venture have some level of functioning ADD. It's just enjoy, what other people would find disruptive, we find invigorating.
Yeah. Oh man, I need to hook you up with, do you know Carl Hartman with Business 303? His whole business is built around, and we've had him on the podcast before. His whole business is built around helping business owners, entrepreneurs that have high functioning ADHD and Asperger's and autism and high functioning autism. And should connect you guys up. He's got doing some speaking stuff or putting an event on. I'm sure having a venture capitalist guy down there would be pretty interesting as well.
Cool.
Yeah. So, what was the journey from school into, did you jump straight into entrepreneur land, or were you working with other, were you cutting your teeth in another organization before then?
So it was sort of decided not to go to medical school, or at the time I decided I was taking a break, to decide if I wanted to go to medical school because, before I take on all the debt and sort of start on that can't return path, I wanted to be thoughtful. So I did it's called an executive residency at a hospital network where you're essentially assigned to a CEO and you shadow different department heads. So you'll do 3 months with the CFO, you do 3 months with maybe a surgical manager, and you work on different projects. And essentially what's cool about that is you get exposed to all the different business units within a hospital system. So it was really cool. I was really grateful to have the experience. I figured out at the time that a super corporate environment maybe not what I wanted long term, but definitely helped me figure out that finance specifically was my biggest passion. So I did that for a couple years. Naturally, you go in at usually a manager level position in health administration, but decided to kind of pivot, decided I wanted to be in venture. I wanted to combine this finance with technology and entrepreneurship. So just started networking like crazy. I picked up an MBA in finance along the way. And I was basically just, I found a guy that was looking for a new general manager for a fund. So basically a fund that was undergoing a restructuring, a shift of management. And I just said, hey, listen, I network, and it's all about people at the end of the day. And he said, well, I can get you in front of him and then it's up to you. So it's a guy named Joel Ivers. We're really good friends still this day. And he was brought on board.
This was here? This was in Colorado?
This is in Ohio. So this is my first venture experience. And Joel was brought on board to basically restructure the fund, to figure out what had been going wrong, how could you improve it, how could you develop processes to do it better, and then also raise additional funds. And I sat in front of Joel, and he hired me within 10 minutes. So it was really, really cool experience.
Did he give you a finance test or some brain whiz math test that you just destroyed?
No, I was just really hungry, and he sensed that. And he is a successful entrepreneur himself. And for him, I think that was the most important thing, especially undertaking, kind of figuring everything out, right? Sort of deal. So I just told him, I said, if you're looking for a guy to just do these things, I'm not your guy. If you're looking for a guy that wants to own everything, then I'm your guy. So he hired me. It was his first week. And then we built out a team and raised a fund and sort of kicked it off from there.
And then what happened? What's transpired since then?
So I had one investment in particular I led that did really well. Joel was really good about just saying, he's just a great leader. And he was really good about saying, look, I'll let you run with stuff. And if you trip, we'll go back to the drawing board. So I was getting to do stuff that analysts and venture firms just never get to do. And I got to lead a deal. And the first deal I led was in a company at the time called TextPride, which changed its name later to Swift Media. And TextPride started off by wanting to be a third-party messaging platform. So they wanted to compete with WeChat, with WhatsApp, which is a bad idea. But their competitive advantage was going to be, hey, look, when I go to there were two Notre Dame guys. They said, when I go to a Notre Dame football game, I want to say go Notre Dame and send a picture of our mascot. And I can't do that. I can't do that via traditional texting, but we can do that via data. So we can do that via WeChat or these other companies. And we want to have our own platform. That's going to be our competitive advantage. And they had done a really scrappy but impressive job of essentially getting these licensing contracts from big brands to use their logos. And they did it in sort of an unorganized way, but super impressive, guys, right? Young, just scrappy. And we saw hey, if you
when was this? Just for context, about what year was this?
That's a good question. This was probably, man, I'm hesitating to put a date on it.
You're like, I'm not going to date myself now.
Well, yeah, I don't know. This was probably 2012.
Yeah.
So maybe 2013, and they we said, look, we'll fund you, but we got to figure out what's going on with your contracts because they're all over the place. And we got to explore your business model. And in them exploring the business model, us working with them, they pivoted into, we'll just put our content on these existing platforms instead of trying to get our own user base. So all these platforms were looking ways to monetize. They had digital stores. And they said, look, for $1.99, you'll get a pack of Disney princesses, and you can use those as many times as you want. What was really cool is you get a lot of interesting information about the user. Not only would you know who the user was, but you would get information about how they utilize the emoticon, how many times.
And you mean like a WeChat user?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So they download these packs for $1.99, and the company was starting to grow really fast because you were launching into applications and stores and applications that had essentially 100 million users. So what they realized when they started talking to really big brands, because initially the structure was, hey, we're gonna split the revenue with a WeChat, right, or a WhatsApp, and then we're gonna give some small 10 or 20% to a brand. And what they realized is brands, and I think it was sort of it was just one of those things where it was that epiphany moment where they were talking to a brand, and I think the brand head, representative, misunderstood what they were saying. So the brand head was essentially saying, well, how much is it if we just want to give away 1 million impressions, right? And this is when the light bulb went off. This is an advertising route for this brand. They don't care about the revenue. So it shifted to brands would they'd launch movies or they'd want to promote some of their content, and they just say, hey, give 1 million free downloads and we'll give you a $2 million budget. So now you start getting really big contracts, started getting really interesting. And those guys sold the company. So it was 11 months after we made an investment, they sold the company to a public company. And and they did really well for themselves. It was a good success story for me, and it helped kind of act as a catalyst for my career. So I did that. I continued at the fund I was with for a while, and then
would you share what they had sold that for?
I think it's private. They sold pretty early. We'll call it between 25 and 35 million. Which which, for the company being around as long as it did and monetizing, it was a big deal. And they got acquired by Monotype, which is a public company that actually owns a lot of the fonts that you see on the internet and in applications. It's a super interesting company, super interesting.
Wait, they own the fonts?
Yeah, that's their business model. So they get like super micro royalties every time fonts are used.
Like even fonts that are used in apps, like a design, like if I had like a mobile app I was editing video on, they would sell those particular fonts to that app?
Yeah, so the way I understand it is, and I don't know their business model really like inside and out, but essentially they own a lot of these fonts. When you go to build an application, you want to use those fonts, you have to pay royalties. So super interesting
I
company.
didn't know that was a business model, but
yeah, neither did I. So super interesting business. This is stuff you get to learn when you're in venture. Just all this,
I'm sure, dude.
all
you
these
probably have
ways people make money.
Yeah, keep them coming, man. You probably got like a lot of really interesting insight like that.
Yeah, so we did a bunch of other investments, and Joel decided to leave the fund. I had a really strong connection with Joel. He retired, and I wanted to do something new. There was a fund called Blue Chip, which is a late stage fund. Their thesis is we'll be the last money in, first money out. So basically companies that say, hey, we need like a year or two more of capital to get to an exit, then they'll fund those kind of companies, right? And so, they're a national firm where the earlier stage firm was more concentrated in the Midwest. And so, I was getting to travel all over, getting to go to Boston, getting to go to San Francisco, and probably spending most of my time, though, in New York. I'd say 80% plus in New York, just working with these companies to help position for exit. Some of that included acquiring other companies, which is called a merge or a roll up. You can call it whatever you want, but essentially you're saying, hey, like we'll acquire you, and that's a really inorganic way or a really fast way to expand our product offering, our product suite, or
so that they can sell that entire portfolio to got it.
Yeah. So
is that pretty common? A lot of like any company that's trying to get funding, they'll pursue that by acquiring other competitors or whatever before they exit?
Yeah, it's becoming more and more common. It's a really good way to increase the value of a company, but it's also a really good way to get engineering and leadership talent into the organization. So it's like, if we can get capital, if we say, hey, we want to be in this vertical, we have no presence, it's so much easier to just get a high functioning team that has a built out product that's been tested, right? And then you're instantly in it.
Right.
So yeah, that's later stage, right? Venture, but it's certainly becoming very, very common.
Yeah. So you being so finance driven and passionate, is that usually what you're going to go off of when you're working with a company that's looking to raise capital? Or do you find yourself mostly going with like your gut and intuition and kind of more the big picture? Is it really more black and white? Like, here's your finances, here's your profit and loss statement. Based on this, that's what we're going to invest.
Yeah. So early stage is definitely more of a combination of psychology and feeling out leadership. And then also, there's quantitative measures as well. So there's the basic fundamentals, like, is the market size big enough? Do the unit economics make sense? Do things scale well? Right? There's basic fundamental questions. And what I always tell entrepreneurs is your financial pro forma is a way to tell a story with numbers. So what you see a lot of younger companies do is they create these pro formas that are essentially what do I think an investor wants to see versus what is realistic and what makes sense. And, I think you should do everything from a financial driven perspective. So like, for instance, if your revenue is going up, but you're not increasingly having a proportional increase in customer acquisition costs, then that doesn't tell really the story that makes sense. So when you're early stage, it's, does the leadership team know what they're doing? Are there a lot of unknown unknowns, or do they know where the gaps are? Can we help fill those gaps with leadership or with other resources? Does the product, does it get good customer feedback? So at Zero G Capital, we're extremely focused on customer feedback. Our philosophy is, doesn't matter if we like the product, and it doesn't matter if you like the product. It matters if your customer likes the product. Right. Your customers will pretty much tell you.
It's easy to get infatuated with your own stuff, right?
Well, yeah. So I actually recommend entrepreneurs to, if they're doing like starting a company in a methodical way, there's, you want to do like 20 to 100 customer calls before you build anything. I always tell them, I say, tell them it's a company you're interested in investing in, or it's your friend's idea. Because people are always hesitant to give negative feedback about somebody's baby, but they'll give like very transparent feedback if you tee them up right. Like,
I like that.
So I even say,
your suggestion on market research is literally cold outreach to 20 to 100 potential customers and just positioning it in the way that, hey, my friend is thinking of doing this business, or I'm thinking of investing in this. What are your thoughts on it?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's all the stuff that's the lean startup kind of playbook, but do things that don't scale early. So, if you're doing like a food delivery service, don't build an app, put your number in a dorm and have people call that number, and then go pick up the food yourself and deliver it, right? Like, you don't need to spend $100K to build an app in order to figure out if people will pay to have food delivered. So you got to be scrappy. Those are the entrepreneurs that we're attracted to the most, the ones that have that kind of philosophy, and will brainstorm how to solve problems in a resource efficient way before we really pour that fuel in the fire. And in the industry, that's called market product fit. So basically the first funding or two fundings of a startup is trying to figure out what is the market product fit, or what is the exact way the product has to be delivered to the customer for them to be delighted by it and willing to pay and glad to pay for it. So that's early stage. Late stage is much more finance driven, quantitative. There's a track record. You're talking about companies between, it depends how you define late stage these days, but often 10 to $50 million in revenue. They've had a track record of what they projected versus what they achieved. There's much more of a sophisticated organization. You're able to track growth rates much easier, and you're able to use a lot of traditional kind of financial valuation tools.
Mm-hmm. So the early stage, they're still conceptual, and you would procure or invest based on the validation of how good that idea is. And then later stage is more finance driven. It's really black. It's like what's in, what's going out. They're established and actually selling product.
Yeah. So you're, early stage, normally technology companies are trying to do something different. They're trying to be disruptive. So there are ideas of how that can play out, but there's certainly not a track record in a statistically meaningful way of how it has played out. When you're going with later stage companies, it's still like you're still kind of, maybe a company is raising money to enter a new vertical or launch a new product. So ironically enough, when I went late stage, I was surprised at how much of my early stage experience was applicable. So, you get companies that they launch a SaaS platform. It's something they've done white glove or they've done for their customer. And they say, man, it would be really profitable if we come with a software tool where customers would do this themselves. And you see companies spend like $3-4 million developing a product and then starting to market it, and no one's buying it. Well, they didn't do their customer research and realize, hey, I don't want to do that. I really like that you guys do that because I don't get paid anymore if I have to do this work myself via a SaaS tool or if you do it for me. So it was interesting. You'd see companies get away from that and then they'd have to come back around. I think that's normal. I think as companies start to scale, they struggle with that identity of, how do we become a more mature looking business, but not lose that scrappiness or the startup kind of roots that helped us get to where we are.
Would you rather would you rather be investing in early stage companies or later stage?
It's fun to do both, and they're very different. Early stage is a lot more fun. It's more exhilarating, but it's riskier. You're going to have a lot of zeros in the sense of zero returns with early stage than later stage, right? With later stage, you're going to have a lot of like 1x or 2x kind of scenarios, or half x downside scenarios. Early stage, it's just really fun. Like I love working with entrepreneurs. I love kind of sitting in a room and helping whiteboard and helping like understand their business and try to give guidance in a constructive way. Later stage, you get some of that. I think with later stage, you're dealing with really successful people that have done it or are doing it in a successful way. And you learn a lot from those guys, right? Like super intelligent. They're on top of their game. They're experts in their field. So, both are fun. I would say probably early stage is a little bit more fun because it kind of fulfills that kind of, what should we call it? Like aura of starting your own company, right? Like, right. We're going to start something that's going to be huge. And there's
the next Facebook, right?
Yeah. There's that kind of energy that goes behind that just determination and drive against all odds to do something unique.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like fight or die in those scenarios with the early stage. And this is so fascinating. I've even non-VC and other entrepreneurs and leaders we've had on this podcast, and you and I talked about this the other day, is, what's some of the bigger misconceptions about going to a VC or raising capital? Like you had mentioned, you don't need $100,000 to go product test. You can go bootstrap your first sales and get proof of concept. So with the shift and the popularity of going and getting funding, what would you express as some of the biggest misconceptions about going to a VC and raising capital?
Well, so just on that point, in today's day and age, very few people are going to pay for development. At least very few institutional firms are going to pay for development. Like 15 years ago, if you wanted to launch a software company, you had huge amounts of capital costs up front, right? You had to own servers and there were just tons of infrastructure costs. Today, with all the tools, you can start a company for like $100, $200, right? Throw up a website, throw up a Shopify store, something like that, right? So the cost to develop something is much lower. How do you feel about
crowdfunder? Not to deter entirely, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's great. It's another source of capital. Mm-hmm. Startups can always use more capital, especially at the early stages. So the more capital, the better. A few other misconceptions are that it's just going to be basically I have to sell them on the idea or the concept, and that investors are essentially just going to look for sort of, do I like this, right? And there are sort of some investors that do that, but really there's sort of like a science to this, right? Like, and I mentioned like what's the market size, what are the unit economics, what's the pro forma telling us, what kind of size team does this need, who are your competitors? So just really like, it's not just going in and saying I have an idea. And I think that's sort of emulated now throughout the ecosystem. Like we don't get a lot of entrepreneurs that just come in and say like I've got an idea and I've got a business plan, which I don't even see business plans anymore. Other things when it comes to fundraising, VC is not the right fit for everyone. And it's a really bad thing to get venture capital. It's like actually the worst thing that can happen if you get venture capital and you aren't a right fit for it. Because a few things, right? So suddenly you're going to have bosses, and some entrepreneurs, like they want to be boss. They don't want to have to check what they do with anyone. And that's why they became an entrepreneur, right?
Right.
But also, you're going to have to raise additional funding almost always if you take on venture capital. So, you have to hit like, there's certain metrics, common metrics of success that make you eligible for additional capital. And if you're not able to hit those, then burning cash, which means, your expenses are more than the money you're bringing in, is just not a good idea, because eventually it's going to run out and you're going to be out of cash. And whenever you run out of cash, it's game over.
And you're just funding a bleeding product. But do you ever invest in those types of companies where there's big opportunity, but somewhere along the line they took a misstep, now they're burning through cash, but VC would be the route to go in and fix that situation?
So most companies are burning cash at the early stages in venture, and even in the later stages.
Not profitable.
I think Uber had the biggest loss ever for a company.
Yeah.
And there's reasons for that, and it's okay to do, right? In the right instances, it's okay to do. So you asked, essentially, there are companies that take missteps all the time. So the most common missteps are you're way too optimistic in how fast you would start pulling in revenue. So you didn't raise enough money. So maybe you're doing okay, but you don't have a big enough war chest to kind of make it to the next place. The other thing that we see happen pretty often is entrepreneurs will sort of guess where they need to be to get the next round of funding. So generally you raise capital about every year and a half, 2 years. And they'll say, okay, we're going to be here. And then investors will put in, we'll call it $3 million. Well, did you talk to those investors? No, we just think this is what feels right. We'll go talk to them. Find out what you need to do over the next year to 2 years to be an easy yes. And then raise the amount of pick the amount of money you're raising around that and how you're going to spend that money around that. Right. So, because otherwise it's we're raising $1 million. Why? How did you come up with $1 million? It sounded good. $1 million does sound kind of good, but it doesn't really it doesn't help us figure out how sound your plan is. So we do that, and we always tell entrepreneurs it's going to take twice as long and it's going to take twice as much money. So don't be scared of dilution. If you do the math, the dilution won't matter that much. If you actually do the math, especially on a personal level. And, it's better safe than sorry. I mean, it's sort of take additional money and think of it as insurance. You're giving up a little bit of upside if you're successful, but in a downside scenario, you usually get nothing. So
you're saying over raise what you think you actually need. So when bad times hit, you're covered, although you may lose out on certain percentages that'll, save your ass in the long term.
Yeah. It's if the company sells for $100 million, maybe by over raising, you personally, you get $15 million versus $20 million, or $15 million versus $18 million. But, at the end of the day, that's way better than getting nothing.
Right. Well, isn't that a big misconception too? Isn't the average company buyout or whatever, wouldn't it be anywhere from $1 million to $10 million? It's people think they're building the Facebooks of the world, but the vast majority, it doesn't really look like that.
Yeah, the data on venture-backed companies is probably going to be higher than that. It's probably going to be in that $20 to $30 million range.
That's been pretty average for yours, for the ones that you've done over the years?
I don't have the numbers, but I think those are pretty average early acquisitions, right? And some of those, I think, the companies could have kept growing and been way more profitable. But, sometimes it comes down also to you have a entrepreneur that says, look, I'm 26 and I'm going to get a $5 million check, that's going to change my life. So, there are decisions that happen like that. And that's sort of, sometimes you have to have those conversations with founders and, they make their own decision, but at the end of the day, there's a board that has to approve everything. And, there's thoughtful heads in the room, but I would say that $1 to $10 million, it's probably for more traditional businesses that aren't venture backed. If you're venture backed and you're successful, then you're essentially going to be, growing faster. So your valuation should be higher, but there are those transactions that happen, right? But $1 to $10 million is not those kind of acquisitions are not a win for a VC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. now on the VCs, like would a VC like you guys, I'm not because I'm not super like well in the startup space, like versed in the startup space and venture capital and all that good stuff. So do VCs like you encourage people just cold from the streets to reach out to you and pitch ideas and pitch and send their P&L statements and have you guys look through that stuff? Like what are the best practices to capture the attention of a VC like you guys?
Yeah, just reaching out is fine. Getting an introduction from somebody is better, but certainly you don't want to send anything half-baked. You want to, I mean, there's easily accessible resources. There's world-class accelerators in our backyard, like Techstars, and they have entire mentor networks. And
do you know Ty, Colorado, Ty of the Rockies?
I do know them. I don't know them super well, but I believe they're an angel group.
Yeah.
Yeah. So listen, there's lots of like resource people to talk to, like go practice your pitch, go send them your deck, like get feedback. You don't want to send anything half baked to an investor. When we have a company reach out to us, we pretty much expect them to have a deck. We expect them to have financials. Usually there's work to be done on the financials. We have actually a template that we've put together to help entrepreneurs with that. And we're comfortable working with entrepreneurs, but you got to have you got to have something vetted out. And for us, almost always there's a 10K minimum monthly revenue bar, which allows us to just be, it's like we can do research on customers because there are customers. There's been that sort of initial reiteration of the product, right? Because they're selling something.
Yeah. So for you guys, it's not necessarily conceptual startups. That's not where you're spending time.
Right. Yeah. And we'll talk to companies early, but it'll be love what you're doing. Here's where you need to be. Mm-hmm. We try to be helpful. We try to we try not to be cagey or give vague no's. We try to be direct and in a constructive way, because as an entrepreneur, no is a hell of a lot better than maybe, right? If you can get the reason why no, like, tell me no, great. Tell me why. Tell me.
It's better to know, right? Get that feedback. Even though feedback sucks, I think that's something a lot of entrepreneurs miss.
Well, feedback's how you get it right. So, when we go back to that analogy that I gave, it's better to pitch your idea as somebody else's idea. People will go, hey, that sucks. It's like, yeah, I thought so too, but tell me why you think so,
Right. Yeah.
Oh, it's way overpriced.
As you drop a single tear out of the corner of your eye.
Right. Yeah. Well, and they'll say, well, it's overpriced. The interface is clunky. Like, totally. What price would you, if the interface was fixed, what price do you even think these guys could sell this for? Well, I'd probably pay this. Right. And that's sort of how you get to that market product fit.
So what are some of the top, I guess, entities in Colorado you would recommend to people who are listening to this in order to get prepped enough to come approach a venture capital firm like you, like your guys's?
There's tons of online resources. So like if you just type in, how to.
By the way, I keep saying you guys listening, it's Zero Gravity Capital Management. That's where Michael's new space is.
Yeah, that's right. That's the fund. There's tons of online resources. Mm-hmm. Techstars has a ton of resources.
Techstars.
A lot of the big VC firms like Foundry, Brad Feld and Seth and the other guys there have put out a series of books that are really good. And there's books like Lean Startup, 4 Steps to Epiphany, that are sort of pillars in the startup community of how you take something from an idea and sort of scale it. So, any of the accelerators around here, there's Boomtown, there's, I mentioned Techstars, I know there's a few incubators, though they're sort of escaping me, and then Galvanize in the co-working spaces, right? There's always entrepreneurs on there that are just eager to help. Mm-hmm. And there's meetup groups, that are specific to different, different like technologies or meetup groups just for entrepreneurs in general or tech entrepreneurs. So there's tons of
more than enough
More than enough.
Yeah. Which also is a challenge, I think, because when you got so much noise, it's like, where do you focus? So luckily there's guys out there like you who know what the key places to get information are.
Well, and it's always easy to react to something versus just going in and vaguely saying, I'm looking at doing this, having like, even if you're not fully confident in it, right? Like, you got to get tough skin as an entrepreneur. So, hey, I've got a deck. Would you look at it and tell me what you think? Or because I heard from so-and-so that you've raised venture before. Or, hey, like, I've got this financial model. It's in rough shape, but I know you had to do this before. When you've raised capital, can you help me with it? Right. So it's just asking around. I mean, Denver's super friendly. Denver and Boulder. I mean, it's amazing. You can get a cup of coffee with just about anyone here, but don't waste their time. Right. Like, don't just ask like high-end questions because, vaguely, because it won't be a very constructive meeting.
Do your research ahead of time and find a way to add value to that person before spending their time. Right.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah. Mr. Klein, share a little bit about Zero G and what your big picture plans are with that. And then how can people get into contact with you?
Yeah. So zerogcapital.com. You can access us on the website. At least my contact information's openly available there. Mike at zerogcapital.com.
It's been a few months now, right? Since earlier this year, you guys started that fund?
Yeah. So we launched under the branded name Zero G Capital at the beginning of the year. We've done 4 investments out of that. As I mentioned, we're early stage. We're probably what is being called now either seed or seed plus. So, we'll invest in companies that have some revenue. 10K is the floor, but we've invested in companies at like 60K a month.
10K a month, right?
10K a month, that's right. But we've invested in companies that do 60,000 a month in revenue. Really focused on customer due diligence, vertical agnostic, but technology driven. But if it's a business model we can understand, we stay out of pharmaceuticals or technologies that just require really deep domain expertise. We like how cool everything sounds in those fields, but we're, I think, just smart enough to realize, like, we know what we don't know, or if we can't go to a whiteboard and explain this to somebody that we.
Why no pharmaceutical?
Just it requires a few reasons. One, the business model that pharmaceutical companies don't monetize for a long time because there's a tremendous amount of research. And so because of that, you really have to have people on your team that understand the science extremely well. So a lot of venture funds that do pharmaceutical, that's all they do.
Mm-hmm. And what's your big, scary, hairy vision of Zero G?
Yeah, build a world-class investment brand and just continue to be known for helping entrepreneurs and just, helping companies grow. Yeah.
And anyone listening to this, any partnerships or collaborations or resources you guys are looking for right now? Anyone that may be listening to this?
We're always looking to meet other investors. We're always looking to meet.
You want to add into the fund?
Well, we will be doing some fundraising, but I also mean just people that are investing in startups. Similar, like earlier than we do, later than we do, at the same time that we do. We never put in more than 50% of a round, so we're team players by definition. Service providers that work with entrepreneurs, it's a great mutual kind of value add, right? For a service provider to say, hey, like, I can introduce you to some funding options, and for, that's great. And we love getting deal flow, or we love, meeting new companies that are doing cool things that we can connect with. So always looking to connect with those individuals and then connect directly, obviously, with entrepreneurs that have something they think that might be a right fit for venture capital. And they're kind of at a stage where they think it makes sense for us to talk, or they think they'll be there in the next, 3 months.
And best way to get you just through the website?
Yep. We've got an application.
And I think you're part of the Denver Denver Startup Group on Facebook also. Are you part of that group?
Yeah, I am on that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because that's actually how I've discovered you. Is I posted in there, hey, who are some of the top VC folks that we should bring on the podcast? Paul Foley put you as a highly recommended man. So
yeah, Paul's great. We're good friends.
Yeah, he's a cool dude. Well, Michael, this has been really interesting, man. I really appreciate this. Let's wrap this bad boy up. And anybody reach out to Michael. Those of you that are listening, really appreciate you. Don't forget to subscribe as always. Leave a review, and we'll see you guys next time.